Joining you, our Savannah Jewish Family Services Food for Thought program. Today we have with us Linda Sachs talking to us about Eshet Chayil. If you have any questions during the program, please write them in the chat. We'll have Q&As at the end. Linda, the floor is yours.
Okay, you might have to help me screen share here.
No worries. Here we go. We can see it. Oh, we can go ahead and try to share.
Can you see it? Can you see it?
We can only see the documents like I saw earlier, so try again.
Tell me what to do.
Go ahead and stop sharing and just open the presentation.
Okay. Wait a second. Okay, stop the share. Now just
Great.
open the presentation.
Open the presentation and then share the presentation.
Okay, I've opened the presentation. Okay, and now hit screen share.
Perfect.
There you go. Got it?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I know that almost everybody has got to be familiar with Eshet Chayil, a woman of valor. It's the last 22 verses of the book of Proverbs. We're familiar with it because it's sung, if you will, to the woman of the house on Friday nights. It's also recited at most funerals of Jewish women. There are many organizations that instead of having a Woman of the Year award, they have an Eshet Chayil award, a Woman of Valor award. And this is true not only of synagogues, but also of churches, because don't remember, the Proverbs is part of the Christian Bible as well. Eshet Chayil's come under a lot of criticism since the advent of the women's movement. And you can see that there's been a lot of criticism. I put some of them up here on the slide. What I hope today is to give you enough explanation and enough background so that you can form your own opinion about what Eshet Chayil represents. Is it obsolete? Is it insulting? Is it of great historical interest, or is it totally irrelevant today? Do you find it meaningful? Do you find it appealing? Maybe even inspirational. So what I want to do is I want to start with a reasonable English translation and see what we can derive about the characteristics of an Eshet Chayil. And if you excuse me 1 minute, my husband's on the phone. I'm going to shut the door. Okay. Now we can progress. Okay. Ordinarily, if I were doing this in person, I would elicit responses from you. But since I can't do that, I'm going to have my own responses. So here we go. A woman of valor who can find, she is more precious than rubies. So what does this mean? It means she's treasured. And in the words of, I think it's the MasterCard commercial, she's priceless. Her husband places his trust in her and profits only thereby. Of course, that means she's trustworthy. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. So we know that she is well-intentioned. She seeks out wool and flax and cheerfully does the work of her hands. So we know that she's industrious, uncomplaining, and that she's a skilled artisan. She is like the trading ships bringing food from afar. She gets up while it is still night to provide food for her household and a fair share for her staff. And like all Jewish women, she's a good cook. She's a balabusta. She takes care of things. She considers a field and purchases it and plants a vineyard with the fruit of her labors. So she's a real estate agent and she's a vintner. She invests herself with strength and makes her arms powerful. She's physically strong. Maybe she goes to the gym a couple times a week at the JEA. She senses that her trade is profitable. Her light does not go out at night. She makes a good living and she keeps long working hours. She stretches out her hand to the distaff and her palms hold the spindle. Those are parts of a loom, so she's an expert weaver. She opens her hands to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She's charitable. She has no fear of snow for her household, for all her household is dressed in fine clothing. She makes her own bedspreads. Her clothing is of fine linen and luxurious cloth. So she sees to her fashion's family needs. She makes sure her husband wears a tie that matches his jacket. She's an interior decorator, and she's a skilled seamstress. Her husband is known at the city gates, so she's married well. She has a prominent husband. She makes and sells linens. She supplies the merchants with sashes. So she's a successful entrepreneur. She's robed in strength and dignity, and she smiles at the future. She's honorable, dignified, and she's optimistic. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and a lesson of kindness is on her tongue. She's wise and kind. She looks after the conduct of her household and never tastes the bread of laziness. So she's a take charge person. She's very energetic, like the Energizer Bunny. Her children rise up and make her happy. Her husband praises her. She delights in her children, and she makes her hubby proud. Many women have excelled, but you excel them all. She's outstanding in her deeds and in her character. Grace is elusive and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears God, she shall be praised. So she's a God-fearing woman. Give her credit for the fruit of her labors, and let her achievements praise her at the gates. Give her credit for her accomplishments and her positive attributes. So here I have a listing of all of the attributes that we just talked about, okay? How often do those who wish to defend the otherwise abandoned model, a woman's places in her home, make reference to this particular poem? Yeah, there's a lot of household things in this particular poem, but there are other things as well, things outside the home. The woman mentioned in Eshet Chayil trades. She buys real estate. She oversees agricultural activities, and she's basically in charge of the family's economy. According to some modern scholars, like Rabbi Ben Siegel of Jerusalem, I mention him by name because my husband went to high school with him and is still friendly with him. Eshet Chayil, contrary to being anti-feminist, represents a most modern, accomplished, liberated woman from the time of King Solomon, which was the 10th century BCE. Different way of looking at it, according to Rabbi Siegel. What does Chayil mean? Well, the root of Chayil is Chet Yud Lamed. It basically means firmness or strength. Chayil is often applied to ability, efficiency, and moral worth, sometimes even to wealth. The phrase Ish Chayil, it means a man of general outstanding achievement. It's used in Parsha Yitro. If you remember, we read a couple weeks ago that Jethro, Moses's father-in-law, came to him and said, you know, Moses, you're going to exhaust yourself by making all these decisions when people come to you with problems. So what you need to do is you need to appoint some good guys to help you make the decisions. And he calls them Anshe Chayil, men of valor. There are 36 citations in the Tanakh for Ish Chayil. There are only 3 for women. Only Ruth is mentioned by name as an Eshet Chayil. And of course, in modern Hebrew, Chayal, from the same root, means soldier. So a non-liberal alternative view of Eshet Chayil is that we're talking about the inner strengths of women. Okay, a woman who is a Chayil has the power to perform menial tasks with great dignity, to do everyday tasks with enthusiasm, to raise her children with heroic discipline and unstinting devotion, to infuse her home with holiness, and to create that indefinable warmth and joy that define a beautiful family. And you all kind of know what I'm talking about, okay? This kind of draws attention to the overlooked glory of the everyday, the quiet, unsung strength of the woman, something to be very proud of. On the other hand, compared to a man's role, it's not terribly exciting. Rabbi Bleich, I think I'm pronouncing it properly, is an Orthodox rabbi who writes for the lay public. He published a lot of books for the lay public, and he says that we tend to identify strength with physical power, but King Solomon had greater insight. He knew that true strength comes from within, and that's what's being described here in Eshet Chayil. Okay. It starts out by saying that an Eshet Chayil is more precious than. The Hebrew word is pininim, which means pearls. It means pearls in modern Hebrew as well. You know, the Hebrew girl's name Penina means a pearl. But it's variously translated as more precious than pearls. Most commonly, it's translated as rubies, which it is not. Diamonds. I've also seen it translated as corals. Okay. So which gem is worth the most? Are we talking about monetary value? If we are, then pearls are way down on the list. It takes 1 to 3 billion years for the pressures of the earth to make a diamond, but a pearl takes only 6 months to 4 years. Okay. The diamond, the ruby, all those precious gems are made passively. They undergo the pressure of the earth. The pearl is made actively. Okay. A pearl is created by a process that begins with an irritation. The oyster responds by sealing off the contaminant and ultimately produces a pearl. And so something irritating becomes beautiful, valuable, and a rare gem. Rabbi Yechiel Eckstein says that a woman may be lovely like a ruby, but she's even more lovely if she became beautiful through difficult circumstances that she overcame and became better for it. It's one thing to having been born as a patient, God-fearing, kind person. It's another to master those traits in the face of adversary. Yet the verse calls the woman of value worth far more than pearls. What could be more valuable than a person who's come through a challenge? Well, there are 2 ways you can come through a challenge. One is you can come out bitter at the end, or the other is you can come out with joy. And while the pearl has a harsh and rough external casing, but it's beautiful within, the Jewish woman's true beauty lies within, but also shines and can be seen from the outside as well. And he says there's only one way to become that rare specimen of beauty who can go through difficulties without losing a sense of joy. And that's to believe that it's all for a really good reason. In Hebrew, we say gam zu l'tovah, that whatever happens is happening for the good. And this makes the woman a woman of deep faith. Eshet Chayil is an acrostic. It's the first verse begins with Aleph. It goes through the whole alphabet to Tuf. Okay. You're all familiar with acrostics. You may not know it. Ashrei is an acrostic. In Psuke de Zimra, we say El Baruch Gadol Deah. That's an acrostic. El Adon on Shabbat morning. And of course, on Yom Kippur, we do Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, which is also an acrostic. It communicates a sense of totality. You go from, in English, you would go from A to Z, and that means everything in between. Rav Acha says that whoever weds a worthy woman, it's as if he has fulfilled the whole Torah, meaning he has gone from A to Z with the Torah. This woman keeps her household functioning day and night. What does she do? Buys, trades, invests, plants, sows, spindles, managing the servants. She gives charity. She provides her family with food, and she has to do all these things for each season. So she's working very, very hard, going from A to Z. So where do we get Eshet Chayil? Where does it come from? Well, traditionally, we say it's written by King Solomon in response to his mother's warning about women. The first 9 verses of chapter 31 of Proverbs are an admonishment to Lemuel, who's another name for King Solomon. No, my son, no, O son of my womb, no, O son of my vows, do not give your strength to women, your vigor to those who destroy kings. Bathsheba thought that Solomon was spending too much time with his wives. and not enough time on the religious issues of his kingdom. And his mother is telling him that women are the ruination of men. And Solomon takes the opportunity with the rest of this chapter of Proverbs to tell her that she's wrong. And he tells her why. There's also an opinion that this was written by King Solomon to honor his mother, Bathsheba, who was the wife of David. Still another interpretation says that this is a eulogy that was composed by Abraham for his wife Sarah, or maybe it was composed during her lifetime as a poem in her honor. Why would he have to honor her with such a beautiful poem? Well, if you remember Genesis, there are 2 times that Abraham finds himself having to go to Egypt. And there was a custom in Egypt that if the Pharaoh saw a beautiful woman, and Sarah was a beautiful woman, and he'd want her for his harem, if she was married, he'd simply kill the husband and take the wife. If she wasn't married, okay, then he would leave whatever man she was with alone and still take her. And what Abraham convinced Sarah to do was to say that she was his sister. And that way the king, the Pharaoh, could take her and not kill Abraham. Pretty low trick, I would say, but Sarah did it for him. And of course, it all came out good at the end. Rabbi Yeshaya Halevi Horowitz, also known as the Shalom, says that that Eshet Chayil is actually a metaphor for the Shekhinah, which is the feminine aspect of the divine presence, that it doesn't refer to a woman at all. It refers to the Shekhinah. So why do we do it on Friday night? Well, believe it or not, the tradition is only about 400 years old. It started about 1600 with Rabbi Isaac Luria as a way of greeting the Shekhinah and the Shabbat queen. Now, of course, it's become traditional to recite it as an expression of gratitude to the lady of the house. It's done after candle lighting and after the children are blessed and before Kiddush. Another reason for Friday night is that Chayil, by gematria, which is a number system, has the value of 48. The Chet is worth 8, the Yud 10, and the Lamed 30. And 48 corresponds to the 48 habits through which Torah is acquired. I'm not going to tell you all of them, but a couple of them are concentration, repetition, opening your heart, modesty, and limiting your sleep. So Eshet Chayil is a metaphor for the Torah. The Torah was given on Shabbat, and so that's why we do it on Friday night. Another midrash says that every day of creation had a mate. For example, Sunday and Monday are together, Tuesday and Wednesday, Thursday and Friday. Poor Shabbat doesn't have a mate, and Shabbat complained. So God said to Shabbat, the Jewish people will be your mate. And so we sing Eshet Chayil on Friday night because we're actually singing it to the Friday bride, who's the bride of Shabbat. Some people say that it's recited in praise of our godly soul, which spends the week on earth with us, but then is lifted up spiritually on Shabbat. And saying it on Friday night mirrors the teaching of the Zohar, that all blessings for the coming week come from Shabbat. Why do women? Well, we all know that it was only because of the merit of the women in Egypt that the Jews were redeemed. The men were pretty worthless. It was the women who were devoted to God. We all know about the merit of Miriam, and actually we're going to talk about that a little bit later. The Torah was first offered to Jewish women. If you go back and you look how the Torah was offered, it was offered to Beit Yaakov and then Bnei Yisrael. Traditionally, Beit Yaakov refers to the women. God knew that if he offered it to the men, they'd say no, but the women would say yes. When the 12 spies came back from the land of Israel, they said it was dangerous, and the men refused to enter it, but the women did not. And lastly, the episode with the golden calf, by tradition, it was only the men who donated their gold jewelry. The women refused to. They were not going to contribute to the making of an idol. The Talmud says that Mashiach will come, the Messiah will come because of the merit of the women, of the Jewish women, not the men. And then traditionally we say, who makes the home into a divine spiritual place, a place of Torah, a place where souls can flourish, serving God in all that we do. Traditionally, it's the woman of the house. Okay. This is my favorite midrash of all of them. Okay. It says that it's not just one woman, but that these verses represent up to 22 righteous women. It seems that God created Adam and all was well in the Garden of Eden. He was a vegetarian. He didn't have to work for a living. He got along well with the animals. He didn't have any cares. And then God made Eve, and all hell broke loose from there. Within a couple of hours, she had given him the forbidden fruit to eat, and they were chased out of Eden. And so the angels got really angry with God, and they said to him, what were you thinking when you created that woman? On her account, death has come into the world. Evil has come into the world. Not only that, but in the future, women are going to cause men to stumble, and they're going to take them away from revering you. And so God responded. Kadosh Baruch Hu answered, just a minute, angels, you don't know what I know. You don't know how many beautiful sprouts there are among the women of the earth. And he began to recount them to the ministering angels. And what did he say to them? He recited a woman of valor. And he told them about the at least 22 righteous women that would be in the world. And so this song is sung as a response to the angels' misogyny. So think about it. What does the Midrash say? It says that on Friday night, Gabriel and Michael, two angels, follow men home from shul. And, they stand by the window and they watch what goes on in the home. Well, what's the first thing they have to listen to? They have to listen to the man, even if they're reluctantly listening, praise his wife with Eshet Chayil. And I just love that Midrash. Okay, so who are these 22 or maybe only 19 righteous women? 3 of the women have no names at all. They're cited only because they served the needs of the prophets, and they're described by who their husbands were. It's probable that the Kabbalists who started this tradition were familiar with this Midrash, and they invited 22 women on Shabbat, much as they invented the Ushpizim, the guests that we invite on Sukkot. There's no universal agreement as to whether this refers to 22 women or not. And even people who say, yes, they refer to 22 women, don't agree on who they are. And so what I'm going to do is to show you who some of them are. I've only put in the ones where I can see the connection. They're ones that I do not see the connection, and I've not been able to find the connection. So I just left them out. Okay. Who can find a woman of valor? Her worth is far beyond that of pearls. Well, it's Mrs. Noah. It's Noah's wife. Of course, her name is unknown. By tradition, the first 5 verses refer to Noah's wife and then the 4 matriarchs. Some of it makes sense, some of it doesn't. I think Noah's wife kind of makes sense. Noah could only have done what he did if his wife was behind him. If she didn't agree with what he was doing, he probably couldn't have done it. She had extraordinary love for her husband. He had this preposterous scheme, honey, God told me to build an ark because there's going to be a flood and everything's going to be destroyed. And she said, yes, dear. She was a woman of patience and vision, and she backed up her husband, and she convinced her sons and her daughters-in-law to do the same. Imagine the mess she had to put up with on the ark. So the first one is Noah's wife. Her husband puts his confidence in her and lacks no good thing. Traditionally, this is Sarah. He trusted Sarah. When Sarah said to him, here, I can't have kids, take my handmaiden Hagar and have a child with her, he didn't say, I don't trust you with this. He went ahead and he did it. He trusted her even when Sarah was doing things that he didn't like. For example, when she was mistreating Hagar and sent Hagar, who was pregnant, away, And then when Hagar came back and was reinstated after she had the baby, Sarah didn't like what Ishmael was doing with Jacob, and so she said, with Isaac, and so she said, you have to send them away. Of course, God told Abraham, listen to her. But think about it. Think about what our history would have been like if Ishmael was the one that had inherited the covenant and not Isaac. So that everything that she did ultimately turned out okay for Abraham. She repays his good, but not his harm, all the days of her life. This is Zipporah, Moshe's wife. She took a back seat when Moshe led Israel out of Egypt. She stayed back with her father and the two children, didn't see Moshe for a long time, okay? Moshe neglected to circumcise his sons, and there's an episode, poorly understood, but an episode in Exodus where some angel comes and threatens the two children, or maybe threatens Moshe as well. And Zipporah realizes it's because the kids aren't circumcised, and so she circumcises the children. And then maybe it fills the dictum of she returns his good but never his harm, because we know from the episode with Aaron and Miriam that they were very concerned about how Moshe was treating his wife. He was so busy freeing the Jews and taking care of everything in the desert that he kind of ignored her, and yet she remained faithful to him. She gets up while it is still night, and she provides food for her household and a fair share for her staff. Traditionally, this is Batya, Pharaoh's daughter. She did arise early in the morning when it was still dark to go down to the Nile. Why did she go down? Well, probably to bathe. There's a midrash that says she went down to the Nile while it was still dark because she was going to use it as a mikveh to convert to the religion of the Hebrews. Or maybe she went down simply to save a Hebrew baby, which of course she did. She considers a field and purchases it and plants a vineyard with the fruits of her labors. Okay. A play on words. Yocheved is Moshe's mother. What is the fruit of Yocheved's labors? It's Moshe. Or it may be Sarah. Why Sarah? There's a midrash that claims that Sarah asked Abraham to buy the cave of Machpelah as a family burial plot. There's nothing in the Torah about this. This is strictly a midrash. And so he did. She invests herself with strength and makes her arms powerful. Okay. This is Miriam. She chastised her father when he divorced Yocheved, telling him that he was worse than Pharaoh, because if the Jews all divorced their wives, there would be no further boys to be killed, but there would also be no further girls to live. She prophesied that the future child of Amram would save the Jews from slavery of Egypt. And the midrash is that when Yocheved was forced to put Moshe in the Nile, she was very angry with Miriam, and she slapped her and said to her, okay, kid, so where's your prophecy now? You know, he's going to die. He's not going to save the Jews. And at that instance, what the Torah says is that Miriam stood by, tetat save, from afar. That's the same root that we use for monument. And what it means in the midrash is not that she stood by just because she was watching, but she stood by her prophecy that Moshe was going to save the Jews. She stretches out her hand to the distaff and her palms to the spindle. These are parts of a loom, okay? Okay, so this refers to two people. Judith, there's a Hanukkah midrash that Judith was a pious young widow from the city of Bethulia. And she was moved by the plight of her people. She had a lot of faith in God, and she decided she was going to get rid of the general Holofernes all by herself. So she spruced herself up, put on her finest clothes, and she went into the enemy camp under the pretense of bringing the general of the Assyrian army information that would ensure his victory. He thought she was beautiful, and he asked her to dine with him because he was planning to seduce her. As the text in the book of Judith recounts, Holofernes was so enchanted with her that he drank far more wine than he had drunk on any other day of his life. Judith saw her opportunity. With a prayer on her lips and a sword in her hand, she saved her people from destruction by beheading him and carrying his head away in a basket. This is an ordinary woman who uses her strength, making use of a sword instead of her spinning instruments. The story is recounted in the book of Judith, which is 2nd century text. It's deemed apocryphal by Jews and by Protestants, but it is part of the Catholic editions of the Bible. The other one is Yael, another one of my favorite characters. Yael lived in the time of Deborah. She invited Sisera, who was a general, into her tent. She fed him bread and milk. And some people say that she actually seduced him, knowing that after he had sex with her, he would fall asleep. And while he was sleeping, she hammered a tent peg through his temples. Cool move. She has no fear of the snow for her household, for all her household is dressed in fine clothing. I put scarlet in parentheses because that's what it actually says. It says scarlet. In most translations, it says fine clothing. This is Rahab. She was a Canaanite prostitute who hid the 2 spies sent by Joshua to spy out Jericho. And in order to identify her household so that when the Israelites came in and conquered Jericho, they wouldn't touch her house, she placed a scarlet thread out the window to indicate that's where she lived. Some people think that's where we get the term red light district from. I don't know. She makes her own bedspreads. Her clothing is of fine and purple cloth. This may be Bathsheba because she bore Solomon and Solomon dressed in linens of purple. They think it might refer to her. Her husband is known at the gates where he sits with the elders of the land. This is Michal, Saul's daughter. Because, of course, her husband is King David. She is robed in strength and dignity, and she smiles at the future. Actually, what the Hebrew says is not she smiles at the future, but she rejoices in the last day. According to the Talmud, she finally gave birth to a child and then died. And that's what this may be referring to. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and a lesson of kindness is on her tongue. This is another one of my favorite characters. This is Serach bat Asher. She's the only woman mentioned in the genealogy of Numbers. She told Jacob, her grandfather, that Joseph was still alive. Her father and all her uncles told her that she should be the one to break the news to him because they were really concerned about his health. That's a midrash, of course. And Serach is the female equivalent of Elijah to Persian Jews. They have all kinds of miraculous tales of her as protector of people in the time of need. And she's also the only one who remembered where Joseph's bones were buried, so that when the Jews left Egypt, they could take out Joseph's bones and fulfill their promise to him to bury him in Israel. She looks after the conduct of her household and never tastes the bread of laziness. This is the widow who cried out to Elisha that she had no money and the creditors were coming to enslave her children. If you remember the story, he told her to take the small amount of oil that she had at home and to borrow jugs and jars from her neighbors and to fill them with the oil. And the oil miraculously lasted in order to fill all of the jugs. She sold them and paid off her creditors so they could not come to enslave her children. Her children rise up and make her happy. Her husband praises her. This is the wealthy wife of Shunem. She was a barren woman, and she noticed that Elijah would pass by every month or so on his way somewhere. So she called him aside one day and said to him, "Why don't you stay with us? We have an extra room." She made the room up for him. She fed him. She was very kind to him. And in return, he told her that she would have a child, which she did. And flash forward a couple of years, the child's in the field. He puts his head on his hand. He goes, my head. And he collapses. Presumably, he's had a sunstroke and he dies. And the wife of Shunem, who has no name, goes and finds Elijah, and he comes back and he lays down on the child and breathes into him, and he resuscitates the child. Okay. And of course, her children rise up and make her happy. That's the origin of why she's mentioned here, because her child actually got up and she was very happy about that. Many women have excelled, but you excel them all. This refers to Ruth, the great grandmother of King David. She's the only woman in the Bible who was actually referred to as Eshet Chayil. And remember, she was not born Jewish, she was a Moabite. Maybe Solomon is using this example, specifically Ruth, because he's retorting his mother's advice, saying, look who my great grandmother was. Of course, it was on my father's side, not your side. And actually, they say excel them all means excelled them in years lived, because by Midrash, it says that Ruth actually lived to see Solomon enthroned, and she saw his judging in the case of the two prostitutes who both claimed the same baby. Grace is elusive and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears God, she shall be praised. This may refer to Vashti, praised because she stood up to the drunken Ahasuerus. She was the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar. She reportedly did terrible things, like make Jewish women labor for her in the nude on Shabbat. So she gets her comeuppance when she's forced to work for the drunken king by appearing in the nude. But the rabbis couldn't stomach the demand made on her by the king, no matter how terrible she was. But they couldn't let her get away with disobeying. Hence, they call her the evil Vashti, and that she ends up by being banished or being killed by what she deserves. And so therefore, they say that the first half of this verse, grace is elusive and beauty is vain, refers to Vashti, but the rest of it refers to Ruth. Or others might see Vashti as this whole thing, meaning that she's an aristocratic, wise princess who's trying to knock some sense into the head of her crass husband. Give her credit for the fruit of her labors and let her achievements praise her at the gates. This is Ruth, her kindness and obedience to Naomi. Recall the scene at the city gates when Boaz claims her by levirate marriage. And also it sees Ruth as the ancestress of Kings David and Solomon. So, is Eshet Chayil anti-feminist? For some women on the far right, Orthodox, evangelical, some women in cults, Eshet Chayil represents maybe an impossible standard by which to mark expectations of women and emphasizes their shortcomings. In other words, women should be perfect. It shows women making children happy and husbands proud. So you could look at this as saying a woman is subservient to men. Some claim, if you read it through carefully, it's a way of reducing womanhood to marriage, motherhood, and domesticity. In famous Southern words, barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen. So you could look at it that way. Okay, or we can rebut it. Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Okay, this is the most quoted biblical passage from Eshet Chayil. And what it means is that your outward appearance is not important. What's important is your character. And that's certainly not anti-feminist. You could look at this and say it's not a job description for all women. It's describing individual women, all of whom are meritorious. And it celebrates wisdom in action. All of these things are actions that individual women might do. And it's not instructions for women everywhere. It doesn't say to every woman, get married, have children, take up the loom. It says it's not our roles that define us, but the integrity that we bring to those roles. And I think we can all subscribe to that. It reveals some of antiquity's most advanced, most modern depictions of a woman's strengths, abilities, and religiosity. After all, what is this woman doing? She's trading, buying real estate, overseeing agricultural activities. She's in charge of the family's economy. And in that sense, especially considering the time period, she is fully liberated. And what I think is the best part of it is the only instructive language in the whole poem, meaning you do this, not descriptive, but instructive, is intended for the male audience. Praise her for all that her hands have done. So it's up to you to decide, what is Eshet Chayil? Is it a nice poem about 22 great women? Is it downright patronizing to females? Is it misogynistic? Is it an appropriate model for the perfect woman of all time? Or is it an impossible role model? Is it a poem celebrating Shabbat or the Sabbath queen or the Sabbath bride and has nothing to do with the woman of the house? Is it inspirational? Is it really about the Shekhinah, the female presence of God? Is it relevant at all today? So I'll leave you with this little poem, Women of Valor. May we know them, may we praise them, may we be them, may we raise them. Any questions?
Hi, that was wonderful as usual.
Thank you, Carol.
I really enjoyed it. I have a question about Sarah. She is she's the daughter of Asher. Is that correct?
Oh, Sarah.
Sarah.
Yeah.
And but if she was also the one, and I thought I remembered reading this, to remember about Joseph's bones, isn't there like a 400-year difference?
She was very old.
Okay.
It's Midrash.
So it's not
all
two
Midrash.
different women. It's the
No,
one.
it's the same woman, and neither one of those stories is in the Torah. They're both Midrash.
Okay. So by that account, what proof do we have that it was the same woman, not just two women with the same name?
Hey, the rabbi said it.
Oh, okay. Well, then it must be true.
Any other questions?
I actually have another one while everyone is thinking.
Okay.
All right. So recently there was an article about the problem with women getting a get, and that Orthodox women are starting to fight back as opposed to help the Agunach community for these women who have dead marriages and yet are often through loopholes. The men will go ahead and remarry and, continue their lives, but the women are stuck. They're not even allowed to date.
An Orthodox man cannot remarry Jewishly without.
Okay. In the article, they were talking about loopholes, but that's not the point of the question. The point of the question is that I never understood that situation. The original purpose of a get, I believe, was to help the woman and to provide means for her in a situation, provide for her in this difficult situation. But it is different now in the way that it is understood than both the spirit of the law. And if men go through this where they do the women of valor and they honor their wives, how could we go from that understanding to the rabbis not supporting the woman when a man walks away?
You can't say the rabbis are not supporting the women. They are, but they have no way. They can't, actually they can excommunicate. There's been instances of that. They can do that, but they do everything they can to make the husband, see that he needs to grant the get. Okay. I'm not Orthodox, and I've never heard of a particular case here in this community where we had anything like that. It does happen occasionally.
I was reading about a woman who's 18 years. She was waiting to get a get, and finally.
You have to look at who makes the rules. And the rules are made by Orthodox rabbis. And Orthodox rabbis are men. So you're not going to get any change there. The conservative and the reform both have, if you get a civil divorce, you automatically are entitled to a Jewish divorce.
Does it have to go through a Beit Din?
No, it's actually, it's written, I think it's called the Lieberman clause in conservative Judaism.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, you're right, thank you.
Okay,
Do
there
we
was,
have any other
I
questions?
have a question.
okay.
I'm Phyllis. Hi, Linda.
Hi,
Thank
Phyllis.
you so
How are
much.
you?
Thank you so much for that informative and well prepared. I think the end you spoke of, is this feminist or anti-feminist? Well, I think it could be anything you want it to be. However, I love the idea of the Eshet Chayil on Shabbat at dinner. And I know traditionally we bless our children too. Is there any place where the custom says it's time to bless your husband?
Actually, it's interesting that you point that out. Among, I would say, probably more Reform Jews and conservative Jews, there have been attempts to find passages in the Torah, or the Tanakh, which you could use to bless your husband. I did not look for any of it. But yes, I think it would be a perfectly reasonable thing to do. And if someone could find something and popularize it, it could catch on, especially if they came up with a great tune for it. Eshet Chayil is not a great tune.
Oh, okay.
You can't, it does fit to the tune of Green Sleeves. Okay. But the regular tune that we use is pretty awful.
Well, I
yeah.
do believe that if every husband praised their wife for all that the woman does, I think there'd be less divorces and unhappy women.
Yeah, it gives you a moment to pause and for the
Yes.
husband to say to his wife,
Yes,
you did a good
Thank
job,
exactly.
you did a good job. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, another question somewhere?
Linda, it's a native calling.
Hi.
Not a question, a compliment. You did a magnificent job in the studies, and I know from what I've heard you before, that you're extremely knowledgeable about this, but your delivery using the Southern verbiage in some ways was absolutely amazing and thoroughly entertaining. To me, a woman of valor is exactly everything that you've said, that you've quoted to us. It can be all of it. And any woman who feels that she can't bless her husband, something wrong with the woman. Doesn't have to be written.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be written.
But it would be a
It's
nice
in the heart.
if we could find something. Maybe I'll,
Yes,
maybe I'll
that's
go
up
to
to you.
Safaria and type in praise
You're
husband.
the researchers. You've done it. What magnificent job.
Actually, it's made it the internet and Safaria and resources like that have made it relatively easy to do it. I got interested in Eshet Chayil through Rabbi Silberstein, if you remember him. He was the rabbi who came and
Oh yes, he came.
he was our cantor at AA.
Yes, I do remember him.
And then he came for a 2-year stint when we were between rabbis. And I think we had him for dinner on a Friday night. And I said something like, I'm sorry, we're not doing Eshet Chayil because I don't believe in it. And that's when he started telling me all of these things about Eshet Chayil that I had no idea whatsoever.
Yeah, I had dinner with him one Friday night also at the Zollers. And I was very much taken with all that he had to say, although he wasn't a speaker. We were just all having conversation. And I do remember him well. Tried to give him some of my father's books, but he already had them.
Yeah.
But I do want to compliment you on what
Thank
you've
you.
done.
Thank you. The opportunity to do things like this is a good excuse for me to spend time learning.
It's
wonderful when you have
interesting to talk about the Eshet Chayil and looking for modern versions, because I've done that. We never did that in my house on Friday night because I found it not humiliating, but I I didn't want to be singled out that way. It made me uncomfortable to have that recited to me. Once the kids were gone and my husband wanted to revisit it, I went online to look for some, and you're right, the movements, the more liberal movements now have these, give and take, but I still haven't found one where I like the language. So if
Write your own.
it's not a bad idea, but
one of the articles I read talked about a poem someone had written, which started with the lines, "Woman of valor, appreciate yourself." And I tried to Google that to find it, but it's not posted anywhere. It's not posted anywhere. Where, this is supposed to be said. This is supposed to be said, even if there's no man to say it. If it's a group of women, you recite it to each other.
Linda, I would like to suggest the possibility that the feminist, anti-feminist debate could revolve around, I think when you go through, as you did in your presentation, verse by verse, there is absolutely nothing anti-feminist about the poem, about the prayer. It is nothing but acknowledging and complimentary for various accomplishments that the woman does throughout the week, throughout whatever interval. Perhaps, though, we've come across this idea as the last 50 years has evolved culturally with feminism, that the mere idea that the man presents this poem to his wife puts some women in a mindset that they're submissive in just receiving the poem, where they're not concentrating, or they're letting that become more significant than the sentiment and the words of the poem.
I absolutely agree with you. I think that the feminist movement has, and this is maybe a political statement, has just gone too far.
Sure.
Okay. You can't eliminate all, I mean, what if you had a situation, which is out there, where you have a woman who is the wage earner and the husband stays home and runs the house and the children. Okay. Is the husband going to say this to his wife, or is the wife going to say it, to the husband? I mean, we have to find, role models and things like that. I mean, you could simply do it because it's tradition. You could think about it, and I think I've offered this. If you don't want to think about it in terms of, you're praising the woman because she's the wife, you could say, well, this is for Shabbat.
Sure.
We're doing this on Shabbat because Shabbat, is the bride of the Jewish people.
Well, I think you also run, within the Orthodox community, those who are truly Haredi and completely Orthodox, where primarily, the purpose of the woman is to do everything to allow the man to do nothing but study. That, and of course, within that community, they're going to be the least offended by the poem, because they're not dealing with feminism on really any level, where of course they are the absolute representation of full feminism, because those women do everything within the household. They, the old commercial about going to work and, frying the bacon, making the bacon and bringing it home and frying it. Everything.
We don't use bacon.
Well,
Well, we use what's called bacon now.
yes.
It's called bacon. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
made out of, yeah.
I'd rather just not have it at all. But anyway,
Anyway, I
it's
just wanted you to all to
cultural,
think about, think about this and, appropriate it, for whatever you want.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank
Well,
you. It was very interesting.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you so much. I wanted to invite. I wanted to invite everybody for next week to join us for Food for Thought at the same time. We'll be having John Medovit, the CEO and founder of Our Crowd. He'll be speaking to us about Israel's technology economic miracle by the Holy Land's leading venture capital investor. Please note, we will not be using the same link next week. You have to register. I just sent in the chat the link to register. So if you would like to join us, you will register and get a link to your email with a Zoom link for next week. So I hope to see everybody then. Please make sure you click on what I sent in the chat now so you can register and be all set for next week. And hopefully I'll see you there.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks
Thank
again,
you.
Linda.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Sonny.
Thank you, Linda. It was great, as usual.